SABC News reporter Hasina Gori is outside the SABC. Let's cross to her right now. Very good afternoon to you, Hasina. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to give us an update of the latest?
As other political parties came outside the SABC to call for a halting of the Section 189 process. They're saying that the structure needs to be revisited, that the new structure does not allow for the public service mandate to really be brought about. They're calling for more consultations and saying that indigenous languages and content in indigenous languages need to be preserved and to be saved. We heard from the likes of the ANC Youth League, the Young Communist League, CW, as well as various other affiliations that came out really putting their voices behind the staff workers of SABC. We know from the beginning of this week, several staff members were handed redundancy letters saying that come the end of the year, they could find themselves without a job. That's as the SABC is trying to shed 400 jobs in what they called a cost-cutting measure and in a way to bring their salary bill down. We also saw both mandates being handed to the management by CW as well as by the ANC Youth League. Some of the demands really calling for those letters to be retracted completely, not for a 7-day withholding or suspension, but for them to be retracted completely, but also calling for the board to be disbanded. Many other demands. They asked to respond within 3 minutes. However, the SABC board did say they did not have the mandate to respond. They did not want to see when they give a response and to take back both those mandates to the board and to respond within the next week. That's the latest that we've heard so far and what we've seen coming up today. They've also called for renewed strike action from Monday once again and also calling on staffers to down tool, saying this is a protected strike. We did see through the proceedings there was an SMS that was sent to some workers telling them to come back to work at SABC management, asking them if these strikes and whether staffers were really threatened, and they were reassured management that this was a protected strike and that workers were allowed to exercise their right to protest.
Right, Hasina, we are struggling to hear you, but we'll try to re-establish connection with you from a much more clearer line. But thank you so much for your update. That was our reporter. She's standing outside the SABC head office right here in Auckland Park and giving us the details of the latest with regards to the strike action that has been waged by SABC employees in collaboration with some political parties. And racial tensions still remain deeply embedded in South Africa nearly 25 years after apartheid. Now, this was further heightened last month in Senekal, where a group of farmers stormed the court building during the court appearance of 2 accused in the murder case of farm manager Brendin Horner. The farmers demanded that the accused Sekweche Mahlamba and Sekola Matlaletsa be handed to them. Today in the Western Cape, EFF members marched to the school over allegations that black students were excluded from what was seemingly a private matric farewell party with white students only. Earlier this month, the EFF supporters were confronted by parents outside the school, resulting in 1 arrest. Well, to talk to us about race relations in the country, we will be joined by Teresa Oakley-Smith, the Managing Director of Diversi-T. And Teresa, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to SA Today.
Thank you, Cynthia. Good afternoon to you.
Now, in your assessment, Teresa, have race relations improved in South Africa?
Well, I think you just said it yourself, Cynthia, that after 25 years, we're still struggling with race relations. And I think if we look at the systemic effect of racism, the poverty, the inequality, the unemployment, surely it's not surprising that racial incidents also manifest. I think as well, if we look at our schools, so little has been done in terms of education. the whole process of education, the education of teachers, that the incidents that are happening at Brackenfell and also at a school in Germiston today don't surprise me in the least.
Now, Teresa, when an oppressed majority gains political power, well, we'll be talking about economic power in just a moment, what should happen to its attitudes towards its former oppressors? Because it seems like Nelson Mandela's preachings of racial equality, unity, and as well as cohesion still haven't filtered down to the masses, in particular among racial groups.
Well, I think, the sad thing to say is that I don't think many or most white people ever brought into that dream. I mean, we are still living the same sort of lifestyle, some of us an even better lifestyle that we were all those years ago. And meanwhile, if we look at our neighbours who are living in informal settlements, in townships, in rural areas, we can see that there's a lot worse. And Simpiwe, we never came to the party. There was a hand outstretched to white South Africans for reconciliation, but we never took it. We were never prepared to really grapple with the issues of racism. We were never prepared to apologize for all the years of apartheid and colonialism before that. We wanted our lives to go on pretty much as they've always gone on. And that's actually, frankly, the reality today. I mean, the racial incidents that we see outside schools and that we saw also at Senekal, they may be not violent racial incidents, but I can assure you there are incidents of racism in many, if not most, businesses that may be much more covert, that may be much more unintentional. Also in NGOs and NPOs, those things are happening. And yet we've never really grappled with it. There's been no proper plan to address reconciliation in South Africa. We've kind of hoped that somehow or other people would come together and, get along. But, there needs to be far more direction and strategy if we're really going to effect reconciliation in South Africa. And unless we do that, Simpiwe, we're going to continually have the kind of outbursts of the Brackenfell incidents, which really fills me with horror. And I hope it doesn't become a Marikana type of incident. But you can see how angry young people are. And really, one cannot blame and point fingers at them. They are the people that are unemployed. They are the people that are living in poverty. So we need to begin to really address these questions, but in a systemic way. And starting with things like land. Unless people have land, then they are always going to feel lesser than. They're going to be impoverished. And I think that we need a really systemic approach. In our schools, we need to be teaching about anti-racism. We need to have it embedded in our curriculum. Our curriculums need to be decolonized. Our teachers need to be trained. I believe there's only 2 teachers of color in Brackenfell School out of a number of 40 altogether. So you ask yourself, after 25 years, can they really not find black teachers to teach in this school? What actually is the problem? So I think the government needs to be very much tougher in setting targets for schools, making them comply with acts like the EE Act, so that there is some kind of initiative to really look for and employ black teachers. And then to look at the curriculum as well. It has to be very broad-based, Simpiwe, but we can't carry on doing nothing, because the more we do nothing, the more we're going to have the Brackenfell problems erupting.
That's actually true there, Teresa, and you've made very valid and great points when you spoke of the anger amongst black South Africans, in particular young black South Africans, and you've also touched on the land issue, which remains a hotly contested debate here in South Africa, and no consensus seems to be found on this particular issue. And the big question perhaps that remains unanswered today is whether the South African transformation agenda is still very much alive, if it ever existed, and whether the ANC's vision of economic wealth or economic power for the black majority in South Africa will ever be realized. I mean, does the answer perhaps lies in the transfer of wealth from a few individuals in South Africa to the black majority, or perhaps, if I could rephrase it, should there be an equal distribution of wealth amongst racial groups as the panacea for South Africa's problems?
I think, first of all, to address your question on the transformation vision of the ANC, I don't think there ever was a transformation vision. I mean, I've been working in this area for 25 years, and I've never become aware of any real vision with a structure and a strategy behind it. I know there are vague hopes and aspirations, but clearly they're not going to do. And then in terms of the redistribution of wealth, I mean, I think that's an absolutely key point. And has to be addressed somehow, whether it's through increasing tax on the wealthier people, of whom the majority are white. Yes, I know there's one or two rich black South Africans, but the vast majority of us as white people are doing a lot better. So there needs to be some tough action taken. And I think, as you mentioned, Simpiwe, the redistribution of land, which has been talked about endlessly, I think one needs to really begin to see action taken. And I was interested to hear Vuyani Pambo talking outside Brackenfell just now, and also talking about the need for the landless to have something to work from. I mean, what do we say to all those young people who are unemployed, poor, desperate? And if we don't make some serious strategic moves, Simpiwe, I can only see these issues getting worse. I don't want to be a harbinger of doom, but, we can't keep throwing our hands up in horror every time there's a Senekal or a Brackenfell or a Freiburg High School even. We actually need to get some real action going. We need to look at how education is working. We need to look at how teachers are being trained, but that needs to be done within a systemic overview of how do we address poverty, how do we address inequality, and what can we do about unemployment.
Teresa, it does appear that the minority in South Africa, in particular the whites here in South Africa, are on the receiving end of the vitriolic attacks in the sphere of race relations and racism in South Africa. But then their silence has been deafening with regards to their response to the race relations and the racial polarizations here in the country. What do you think should their response be?
I think that's a very, very interesting perceptive point, Simpiwe, that, while Black people are very keen to address this issue of racism, we're kind of quietly sitting back and I guess hoping it'll go away. I think that we should have started with this years ago. It starts with talking. It starts with thrashing things out, having the really difficult discussions, being prepared to hear other people's views, having a sense of how other people's lives are. So few white people have any sense of the lived experience of Black people, whether it be their domestic worker or somebody that they see every day. We just don't have that sense. And while we are sitting in our ivory towers, if I can use that expression, all hell is breaking out in the townships, in the informal settlements, while people battle to even stay alive, to put bread on the table. And then when they struggle and get their children into what seem like better schools, the ex-Model C schools, they find that their children are treated with racism. There are no teachers there that even look like them. They're taught a curriculum which echoes the history of the past. So, one can understand the sheer desperation of a Black mother who's probably saved and is giving her small amount to send her child to this school. And then she finds out that after all these years, the child is experiencing the same kind of racism that she experienced all those years ago.
All right, Teresa, we are out of time, unfortunately, but we literally have 20 seconds. And a criminalization of racism has been touted as an answer to the racial polarization issue in South Africa. Your thoughts?
It hasn't really worked and it hasn't really been effective. And maybe it needs to be implemented in a far more serious way. But I think one also needs to look at who can be racist in South Africa. If you are poor, unemployed, desperate, do you have the power to really be racist in the things that you're saying? I don't think so. We need to address the inequalities before we can accuse people of being racist in where they're coming from.
All right, Teresa, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Simpiwe.